Okay, I've just been penalized 10 minutes for lack of adapter and loss of first down. I'm only going to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about this project. So this is a Student Journalism 2.0 project, and it's a. I'm going to have just a couple of slides, but mainly I just want to kind of tell you the story of this project because I really enjoyed being part of this. It's actually a Creative Commons project. This was conducted at a couple of Silicon Valley high schools, public high schools, so in California, funded by the Digital Media Learning Competition. So Creative Commons won a DML grant to run Student Journalism 2.0 or SJ 2.0. And so the big questions that prompted this kind of experiment were what the new models, so what would, given the radical changes that were happening or that are happening in the media and in journalism in particular, questions naturally are raised about what does that mean for student journalism and what happens now to the traditional student papers and the old models of student journalism. And so with that in mind, the Student Journalism 2.0 project sought to bring in some of the more open practices and implement them at the high school level, kind of more as a guide, really, than any kind of direct instruction or anything like that. So this was not really replacing the curriculum that was already happening in the journalism classrooms. It was really just meant to kind of nudge them more towards some of the more open, collaborative models. So next question, number 2, we went in asking what were the barriers? What were we going to find? There are always challenges and barriers, so we wanted to identify those barriers. And really the idea here with Student Journalism 2.0 was to kind of chart a course for others who might be interested in similar kinds of projects at this level. And so really we wanted to document what the different barriers were that we ran into as we did this. And so it was really flexible. We had a pretty the framework that we used was very flexible, kind of self-reporting and documenting everything, just because we knew we would have to adapt on the fly. The third and final question was how could we reduce the barriers that we ran into, and especially looking at a more scaled-up implementation of something like Student Journalism 2.0, where in this first attempt, really it was just a handful of high school teachers, lots of face-to-face interaction, and then even followed up by checking up, phone calls, and teacher meetings. So it was very hands-on, and it just wouldn't scale very well. So we were, while we were doing all of that, while Creative Commons was doing all of that, they were also thinking about how to get it to scale. So knowing that it would have to be different than what they were doing the first time around. And so I was brought in. I'm Tom, by the way. Hi. I'm not with Creative Commons, but I was brought in to kind of be a sort of a third-party reporter, observer, and question asker. So that was my role. So then the overall goal or objective of Student Journalism 2.0 is to encourage journalism students, teachers, and advisors to understand and apply legal and technical means to participate in 21st century journalism. So there are all kinds of interesting things we could talk about relating to the changes that are taking place. Newspapers closing down, being replaced by really kind of crowdsourced journalism to some extent, and then online journalism kind of filling in the rest. So lots of radical changes, and trying to bring that to make sense out of that for students of journalism, training up to be the next journalists in a field that is shrinking, is one way to say it. But maybe not shrinking, maybe just changing. And so that was the point, was to look at how to adapt. So I think this really was the case of where maybe a perfect opportunity to bring in more open ways of sharing information, of reporting. So just to touch on some of the recommendations that we arrived at for others to do similar projects. And I guess I should maybe take just a couple minutes to detail a few examples of what was being done, so I don't blow by the fun part. Basically, so as Alex and others were going into the classroom and sort of mentoring the instructors and helping them to put in place some different models, some more open models, we found that some of the biggest challenges actually were before we even got into the classroom. And I think that's something that's important to point out for others who are considering similar kinds of projects. Lots of meetings with concerned teachers, administrators, not so much parents, but certainly administration was concerned about the legal implications of what content belonged to whom, and how if a student is making a decision to openly license this content, does that student as a minor have that right? So some time was spent on trying to hash that out, and basically we got to a place where we felt pretty settled about moving ahead with it, and after some help from some other groups kind of guiding that thought process, we decided to move ahead. But I have to say that some of the biggest barriers were kind of legal, institutional barriers that I think need to be overcome. So in this case, we also had some very open-minded, some fantastic teachers who were very much on board with the idea of the Student Journalism 2.0 project. So there was no problem with it, but we wanted to examine the questions especially from the administration's perspective, try to address concerns and document that, so that hopefully it would be useful to others trying to bring these kinds of openness, open models to a high school setting where you have minors making decisions about their content, and so we determined that was okay. So some of the other recommendations kind of hinge on the kinds of things that we then focused on, which was because a lot of these. Most high schools at this point have some kind of online presence already, so it's not like we came in and said you should make a website. It was more. I think the guidance was more in terms of moving further into more open practices and also observing existing practices. So students were already using shared documents online, Google Docs, for example, and writing copy that way, and so I don't think that really, at least in the student journalism classrooms that we observed, I don't think that there was a real need to teach Web 2.0, but there was definitely a kind of a feeling that somehow the students' content was second class to all that other content that's out there. And so it was kind of a mental shift to think of the idea and I guess, suggest the idea to the students that your content could be picked up by another organization. If you licensed it openly, your content could then be reused. A lot of what they were doing was they were seeing everything we were saying about openness in terms of them doing the reuse. So they would go on Flickr, grab a picture, and then license it, and feeling good about how they're doing some of the things that we've been talking about. But really, I think the bigger step was as the students started to realize, and we did interviews along the way, but there was a shift, and they started to realize that their content was just as important as anything else out on the open web. And so by openly licensing it, we had a few cases just in that couple of semesters of the project. We had a couple of cases of people calling in asking for permission to use different stories, and there were the big there were some big developments in student funding and cuts that were causing a lot of consternation in University of California schools at the time, and so some reporting that happened around that was picked up, and at one point a journalist called in and asked for permission to reuse a story, and which was an opportunity to drive home the point that isn't necessary. And the students started to, the light bulbs started to go on, the idea that by licensing this with a Creative Commons license, you're allowing this reuse to happen without that need for checking. And that way it can really spread much further. So I think I'll stop there just so that we stay on time. But basically, so there is the paper that details each of these recommendations for any of you who are interested in conducting similar projects at the secondary level. So I would encourage you to look at that, and if you have other questions, feel free to ask. But really, a project that proved to me anyway that this is very viable at the secondary level. That open practices are exciting to students that age. It's almost just built in for them. I mean, it was like telling them something they already knew, but then giving them the means, explaining kind of the licensing side of it, so that everything that they were already doing is now legal. So that was well, I'll stop there. But that's student journalism 2.0 in a nutshell. Thanks. And
Thank you, Tom, for your interesting work.
A URL up on the screen for those who want to learn a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. We're a bit late, but anyway, I think we have time for a couple of questions. So,
can I have my dongle back?
Yes, thank you.
I just wondered whether you encourage the students to use Creative Commons licensed material as part of their journalism, as well as outputting content under Creative Commons license.
Yes, absolutely. And sorry for not making that more clear, but as part of guiding the instructors who were teaching these journalism classes, we showed them how the licenses work, and kind of an explanation, as well as some stories and examples to help kind of motivate the students. But ultimately, it was their choice whether or not, and not all students chose to use Creative Commons licenses all the time. actually, one of the things that came out in the study was just the variety of license choices that actually happened. So they didn't all choose CC BY, for example. They chose different licenses, and then when we interviewed them, they actually had reasons for each of the decisions they made that were logical, and so kind of proof to me, at least, that they were getting it.
Hey, Tom.
Hey.
So one quick question. Were there any students who were unwilling to share or had reservations about sharing in general?
No, there weren't. There were no students who didn't share at all. As I said, they did have certain stories that, or certain images and certain stories that different students would license their things differently. Some of them chose to do non-commercial. Some of them also chose no derivatives because they wanted to protect the integrity of their piece. But no, we didn't run into anyone who did not use it at all, and it was an option for them. Although they may have felt a little bit of pressure, I'm sure, to try it. But yeah, everyone tried it in one form or another.
And then just a follow-up, were there other examples of how the students had shared in the past? So, I mean, was this just building on their culture as it existed?
Right. Well, definitely. So the platforms, there was one high school was using a Drupal platform, and I didn't go into a lot of the details, but it's in the paper. And the other high school was using a custom-made platform for hosting their online paper. And so each of them had to implement. Each of them chose to implement a license picker on top of it, and it made the whole process a lot easier. But it basically I think that it was building on what they already had, in the sense that they already had the platforms in place. They then just added, like, for example, the Drupal plugin to make the Creative Commons choice more easy. But it was they did already have, I would say, the kind of what I would expect that most journalism school high school classes already have in place. But not a lot more. None of them were already using Creative Commons license, for example. So that was one of the pieces that the project helped them to add.
Well, thank you, Tom. We don't have time for